It feels like the start of the summer holidays, doesn't it, really? But we are here with Cross Question. As ever, we're going to talk about some of the big issues of the day, the ones that you want to talk about. And our first caller is Joe in Norwich. Hello, Joe.
Good evening. Good evening, and good evening, the panel. I'd like to ask, given the papers released today on the National Disability Strategy, would it be a gesture of goodwill by the government to give disabled people the same £20 uplift that people on universal credit had, instead of having to fight them in the High Court over discrimination?
Well, this disability strategy, the government say they're putting £1.6 billion in to help disabled people in all sorts of different ways. Campaigners say it doesn't go far enough. Amelia Womack from the Green Party, what's your view on this?
I think when we look at what kind of society we want to create, putting things in place to mean that people have got a basic safety net is essential. So when we look at this extra £20 a week that Joe described, the Greens would much rather see a universal basic income that meant that every person received a sum of money each week to mean that people had that basic safety net that they need. We have issues with fuel poverty and all kinds of problems across our society, and just that basic income could help alleviate many people out of poverty, while ensuring that people who are disabled by society don't need to go through those check measures to prove their disability. They're able to access that money as a right, not as a privilege. And I think that's an entirely different way that we can think about our systems. But at the same time, we do need to be putting all of those other points in place, whether that's making sure that our public transport is accessible for visually impaired people. There are so many points where I talk to people who have impairments that effectively don't feel like they can access society because it wasn't built around them. And we need to be questioning many of our structures to ensure it is accessible to everyone. And things like putting in place a universal basic income is one step towards ensuring that there's that financial equality for everyone.
Andrea Jenkyns, that all sounds perfectly sensible, doesn't it?
I mean, first of all, I'm proud of what we've announced today. It's, I think, 14,000 people have been interviewed. There's been selection of surveys, round tables, and it's actually going to cross over every level of government, this. And so I'm really proud of what we're doing. We are listening. And already, though, I mean, let's not forget we've been through the worst recession in peacetime, and brought on by the pandemic. And, we can only do so much with a public purse, and I'm proud of what we're doing with this. We're investing a lot of money into this, and at the same time, I mean, it's fine from the Green Party saying that when they don't have to try and balance the books. When you're sat on the sidelines, it's easy to have a blank check. But when you're in government, you've got to be responsible with money. It's other people's money. It's taxpayers' money.
But Joe's point about... Sorry, Andrea. Joe's point about an uplift of £20 a week. Yes. People on universal credit have had that throughout the pandemic. Why wasn't it given to disabled people as well?
I mean, I've know the government have done major investment, in universal credit. I mean, this is a whole point why we've done this big interviews and surveys, is because we know that things need to be improved. So I think watch this space. Things are going to be a lot better for people with a disability, and it's about time too.
But the problem here is, Maurice, that campaigners are saying, well, look, some of these measures are going to be good. They will have an effect. But they've made 100 different pledges here. Now, on the face of it, you could say, well, that's a good thing. But people are saying, well, this is just a tick list. And a lot of these things should have been done a long time ago. For example, an audit of mainline railway stations for disabled accessibility. We're in 2021. I mean, why haven't the people who own the stations done that already? It's a bit odd, isn't it? Maurice, you seem to be muted. I don't know whether it's at your end or our end, but if somebody could sort out... Marvellous.
I'm sorry, marvellous, yeah. Absolutely. Anything that can be done to engage and bring and make disabled people less marginalised is a good thing, clearly. I think right through this pandemic, we've seen people, disabled people, marginalised even more than normal. We've seen, if people aren't able to vaccinate, for instance, we're talking about vaccine passports, and all sorts of things like this are coming down the line that are going to, unfortunately, I think, make some disabled people even more marginalised. But anything that can make their lives better. I like the idea of the universal basic income. I agree. I think that if we as a country had looked at that instead of furloughing and trying to, the way that we tried to handle the pandemic, I think we'd have done better if we'd said, what do people need to exist? Let's give them that and actually close the economy down that way. I think that would have worked better.
John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance. I mean, I don't want this to develop into a massive discussion about universal basic income. That wasn't the question. But I wonder, as somebody who spends his whole day presumably looking at public expenditure and how governments can waste money and all the rest of it, what do you think about that? And then answer Joe's question.
Well, UBI is an interesting idea, even on the so-called right of politics. There's lots of people on the small c conservative side of sort of the more thinking side, the intellectual side, who actually would like a universal basic income, but only on the basis that it would replace the rest of the benefit system. I think the part of the problem is that UBI would be very expensive. Back of the fag packet calculations, it's in tens of billions, if not more. So it would need to replace the entire benefit system were it to work. And on the disability strategy more generally, look, as you said, Iain, it's about time that some of this stuff came to pass. It's not right that any rail station in the country doesn't have access to people with disabilities. So I know some campaigners today, like Lord Shinkwin, have been quite critical of some of the measures, but some of it is long overdue, and it's about time that the government acted on a lot of it.
I made a slightly facetious mark at the beginning of the programme about saying, well, of course campaigners have said it's not enough because it could never be enough, and if it was, they would all be out of a job. And someone emailed me to say, yeah, but a lot of campaigners don't get paid to campaign, and which is an absolutely fair point. Do you think maybe put this to all of you. Do you think the disability lobby, if I can call it that, does have a loud enough voice? I mean, Maurice, compared to other sectors where there are always people who want something from government, whether it's more money or reforms, do you think disabled people get a fair shout?
I think there's an issue about whether they're given enough platforms to express their views. Yes, I do think that's probably part of the conversation. They're a group that most people in Britain would say, yeah, we need to do whatever we can to allow them to engage with society, and that's not happening. So I think that if they did use their platform, or if they were allowed to have a platform more, then I think I think that they would have the public's ear.
Well, maybe we need to look at that. I've never done an audit of how many disabled people we've had on this panel. I mean, we haven't got any today because, I mean, how were we to know that this is going to be published today, I suppose? But we had Sal Brinton, the former president of the Lib Dems, on earlier in the week. So it's a pity we hadn't booked her today in some ways. Amelia, do you think that there is enough of a powerful lobby for disabled people to make their voice heard?
And we know that society has been created to work for very typically a white man of a certain height, from our cars to our healthcare. We know that there are many. And it's fun for those people who it's been created around. It's been as a result of historic inequalities and injustices. And what we're doing at the moment is recalibrating many of those points, whether that's understanding health issues that women suffer from, that have had lack of research as a result of them not fitting within this group of people that are normally we build the world around. And so, of course, disabled people with disabilities must be at this point of every conversation, ensuring that we're making things accessible, because it's a blind spot for too many people, for the majority of people. But if we are going to have equal communities, we need to ensure that we're addressing the fact that we have created our society around a very typical person, a very typical body, and we really need to recalibrate how our operations work to create stronger equality for everybody.
Andrea, as a constituency MP, what representations do you get on a daily or weekly basis from people with disabilities?
First of all, Iain, to your first point about railway stations, etc. I completely agree with you in this day and age. I mean, Morley Station, for example, I've been, fighting even since I was a candidate, so 8 years now, to get disabled access to our station. People can go into Leeds but it's a big old iron bridge, but they can't get back if they're disabled or if they've got prams or whatever to Morley. And so up and down the country, there's got to be massive upgrades, that included. Now, regarding the lobby, I agree, really. I think what I found as a constituency MP is that you get individual groups sort of working together to, not working together, so working individually to contact you. Like, for example, I might get the Parkinson's group contact me locally. I've done some stuff with them. But I don't think they're as good at working together, these different groups collectively, to be that stronger voice. That's what I found as a constituency MP, and I think we probably need to see more of that. And this is why I think this is a great step forward. 14,000 people have been interviewed with this report that's been brought out today. But yes, a lot more has got to be done. But at the same time as well, though, I think we need policies that's right for society. I'm not a feminist. I don't believe in pigeonholing people. I think we should have just policies that's right for society.
Okay, Joe in Norwich, apart from what you said in your question, what more would you like to see the government do for disabled people?
I'd like to, treat with respect, treat the same as any other person. Andrea Jenkyns' first answer to the question, she did describe that the government had only so much money; they have to decide where the money goes. And basically, she admitted it's discriminatory because all the people who didn't get a £20 uplift are disabled. So the people cut out of the £20 uplift are disabled, predominantly disabled people, carers for disabled people, and families with disabled children.
But also, Joe, there's people who's been furloughed, who are disabled, who's been supported as well. And as I said, it should be we should have a set of policies that's right for society to help those in society who need the most help. And I think this is the right step forward. Yes, there's more to be done, and why don't you write to your local MP as well and put your thoughts forward? I know that my constituents write to me, and then we can ask written questions, oral questions, etc. So please write to your MP as well over in Norwich.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much indeed. That's either Clive Lewis or Chloe Smith. I mean, I'm enough of a geek to know that sort of thing. More questions from you in a moment. If you've been inspired to call in because of what you've just heard, 0345 6060 973. And after 9, we're going to be talking in much more detail about this disability strategy that the government have announced today. So hope you'll call in on that too. You're listening to Cross Question on LBC. It's 8:15.
LBC.
minutes past 8. We're going to do something a little different on Cross Question next week. We may live to regret this, but we're going to have two panellists, normal panellists, politicians or commentators, and we're going to have two LBC listeners on the panel as well. So I hope you're going to tune in next week, because I think that bit might be rather entertaining. We've booked a couple of them already, but if you've got ideas of people that you'd like to hear from, maybe callers that you've heard on the station and you want to nominate, just drop me an email and we'll see what we can do, because we have booked a couple, but we aren't full up yet. Right, Simon is in Southampton. He wants to ask a question to Andrea Jenkyns, Amelia Womack, John O'Connell and Maurice Mcleod. Simon, go ahead.
Good evening. Just before I do, the universal basic income thing, I'm a huge fan of that. And when you did a phone-in a couple of weeks ago on pensions, I texted you in and said, this is an irrelevant conversation, because by the time it all comes around, there'll be a universal basic income anyway. But there you go.
Is this your bid to be a listener panellist, Simon?
I'd love to. I'd love to do this from the other side.
All right. Okay, well, get on and ask your question.
What's the name of your Tory panellist, please?
Andrea Jenkyns.
Right, I'd like, Andrea, for you to listen to this particularly. We currently have a corrupt government. We have a completely morally vacuous, corrupt liar at the top. When a person in everyday life commits an act of fraud, they generally end up going to prison. If you're a minister and you create fraud, you get an inquiry and lessons must be learned. Is it not about time that politicians and ministers are subject to criminal proceedings to help them stay on the straight and narrow?
Wow.
I take it, Simon,
Andrea.
you don't vote Conservative.
I would never. Unless you bring in universal basic income, I would never vote for you.
Oh, okay. I mean, clearly, you're not a supporter of a Conservative, and I guess whichever Conservatives at the helm, you'd use the same rhetoric that they are corrupt, liars, etc. I mean, I disagree. I mean, I think we've got a good leader. I mean, we got a massive majority in 2019, so a lot of the public have got different views to what you've got there. We've gone through a difficult time globally, and the way we've supported people, the furlough, and really trying to protect people. I'm actually proud of our government, so we'll have to agree to differ on this. Clearly, we're never going to agree.
Were you proud of your government when it awarded contracts to its crony mates in the pandemic? I mean, that's what Simon's talking about here, I guess.
Yes. I mean, I'm not party to actually the decisions what's sort of made with awarding contracts. I mean, I know, for example, with the Dyson situation, they had to act quickly, and Dyson, set up a team of people, it costed Dyson themselves to support through the pandemic. Now, I don't believe in cronyism. No, of course I don't. And I do think that whichever parties in government, they've got to be mindful that there's a checks and balances. And I mean, this is one reason I'm a Brexiteer, because I believe in transparency, that you can check with their MP every penny that's spent. So, but I do think, no doubt, tough decisions had to be made during this pandemic. That is the problem. That is the problem, that there were contracts awarded, and we've seen enough detail to know that this happened, to people who were linked in some way to people in Downing Street or close to ministers. Now, one, you can think, okay, well, that's a coincidence. Two, you might think that's a bit of a coincidence. But when it gets to the number that have been reported, it's surely more than a coincidence, Andrea. I mean, to me, I don't care who contracts get awarded to, but I'll tell you the caveat: as long as it's a fair system where it's the best person, the best company for the job, who's the best value for taxpayers' money. As I said, I haven't been involved in this kind of process, so I haven't seen the fine print of the checks and balances on each of these contracts awarded. But I would want to see complete transparency and a fair system.
Okay.
Of course, I would.
Maurice Mcleod.
So if the question is, do we have faith in in the current government to not be corrupt and to tell the truth.
Well, no, the question is, should ministers be subject to criminal proceedings in the event that they mislead the public or benefit from not telling the truth? I mean, that's the essence of Simon's question.
I think if there's proven corruption, if someone is either filling their pockets or more likely filling the pockets of one of their donors and their mates, and that's proven, someone gets a contract that they shouldn't have simply because they are in a certain golf club or are in a certain circle. That's our money and it's being misspent. And I do kind of think that that should be more than a slap across the wrist. If I stole money from somewhere that I worked or someone that was trusting me, I expect to face real issues with that. And it feels as if the worst that happens with a minister is if they're caught and if they admit it, they'll kind of sort of say sorry, go away for 6 months on the naughty step and come back and carry on the same. It really undermines the public faith in politicians at a time when we need the public to actually trust the people who represent us.
John O'Connell from the Taxpayers Alliance. I had a tweet earlier from somebody who said, they never criticise government profligacy. And I said, I think you'll find that that's what they're kind of there to do. You must be outraged at some of the, what Simon would call the abuses of public money over this pandemic, and the fact that so many contracts seemingly were awarded to people that people at the centre of government knew personally.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is to do with delivery as well. So when a contract was awarded to deliver a certain item of PPE and those items of PPE never showed up, I think they're the areas where a public inquiry really needs to press down upon and find out exactly what happened with taxpayers' money. Look, I mean, it was an emergency. We understand that people had to act quickly and take decisions very, very quickly. But that doesn't mean that we can't hold people accountable after the fact. And if it's found that, taxpayers' money was dished out to people who then did not deliver on what they said they were going to deliver on, then there ought to be consequences for that. And look, when the bounce back loan scheme was announced, that was to get money out very quickly to small and medium-sized businesses, and rightly so. But we said at the time that the Fraud Act should be amended so that if anybody is caught abusing taxpayers' money, then they should receive a longer time in prison than was otherwise put forward in the Fraud Act as it stood. So yeah, absolutely. I think that acting quickly was the right thing to do, but there's a bit more stick needed on the other side when people have been found or will be found to have stolen taxpayers' money.
Amelia.
This makes me quite angry for democracy, really. When people vote, they vote to put their faith into the people that they elect. And that faith is about doing the best thing for the country, not the best thing for their own personal pockets. And when we see this kind of level of cronyism, it really makes politicians look like they have no...
Well, let me just pick you up on your language there, because
Okay.
what you were accusing ministers there of were lining their own pockets. Now, giving contracts to mates is very different from benefiting from those contracts yourself.
Yeah, you were right to call that out. But I also think that when we've looked at this Conservative government, that over the years we've seen an austerity agenda where 50% of the benefits of wealth in the UK went to the richest 96% of the population, while 94% of the population, while only 6% of the poorest homes received any benefit of the wealth created. We're seeing a complete inequality of where our wealth is going, and people feeling like politics doesn't work for them. And it doesn't work for them because they're not seeing the benefits of it. But they're seeing the friends, as you said, the friends of those government ministers benefiting from it, and they don't feel like they are engaged. Now, I think it's really important that we give people power in our democracy and in our politics. And there should be a lot more of a right to recall of MPs and a lot more accountability for these actions to ensure that people do feel like they've got more say over the people who claim to represent them.
Do you think that sometimes we make 2 and 2 add up to 5 in these things? I mean, I'm thinking of the instance of Matt Hancock's local pub landlord, who I think won a contract to provide was it PPE or something like that? Now, what I imagine happened there was this guy got in touch with Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock forwarded it on to somebody who deals with this sort of thing, and the contract was awarded. He may not have even known about it, but because it's Matt Hancock's local pub landlord, everyone draws the conclusion that, oh, well, he must be, and I'm sure Simon would probably concur with this, that must therefore be corrupt because the landlord of the Cock Inn, no jokes please, got that contract.
But it's about transparency, isn't it? And the way that you should work as a minister should be in a way that enables the best transparency for the people. And when things are in kind of private, worked on a private basis, you don't get that same scrutiny and transparency. So whatever happens in politics, it's the systems in which we operate that means that we're able to hold ourselves to account to them, and politicians should be operating through the highest standards, the highest systems, that means that they're genuinely working for people.
Simon, do you want to respond to what you've heard?
Yeah, I just think it's amazing. The reason why I specifically singled out Andrea on this question is because I was really keen
I'm a Tory.
to emphasise my question to her so that she had a fair chance to respond. Now, in her defence, at least she didn't answer in the from the Tory playbook with the word vaccines. So she's got that in her favour. But all of your other panellists answered the question. All she did was bang on about how good the Conservative Party is. And that's part of the problem here. We know, as voters, that you're not all that. We can see what's going on. But you take us for fools. And if you want my honest opinion, my opinion is that Johnson should be in prison at the moment for what he's done.
Under what charge? Well, what law has he broken?
Well,
see, this is a bit like saying Blair should be in jail for Iraq. No one can ever say what law Tony Blair broke.
Well, I mean, Johnson's got the blood of 150,000 people on his hands. Now, never once has he apologised. Never once has he actually tried to make amends and make it up to people. He constantly bangs on about how good he is and what he's done. The good he's done. And
so you're saying one person is responsible for the COVID deaths? Really?
He's at the top and the buck stops with him. And leaders lead by example. And
yeah, but what crime has he committed, Simon? What crime has he committed?
Well, I suppose if you want to put a word on it, it'd be something like manslaughter, I suppose. Oh. He's responsible for those people. In my opinion, he's responsible for those people. He's also responsible for 3 million that got excluded from any support. He's responsible for every bad thing.
And that is a fair point, because I mean, you're right that the buck stops with him, and on policy decisions like the furlough and the lack of money for the 3 million excluded people, you're absolutely right to hold him to account for that. But a court of law is not the place to do it. The ballot box is the place to do that, surely.
Okay, we're sort of conflating two items here. In a case where it's blatant, they've blatantly benefited by their actions, or their friends or family have, then that's one thing. That's one specific thing. In general, his handling of this pandemic has been atrocious, and yet rather than have the humility, and any of his MPs to have the humility to stand there and say, do you know what, I apologise for this, we got this wrong.
Simon, are you not proud of our vaccine rollout in this country? I mean, look at the other EU. Are you not proud of our vaccine rollout in this country? Well, have you got nothing to be proud of?
Well, let's actually look at that factually, shall we? Okay, Johnson had nothing to do with that. The people who he tasked the right person to...
Oh, so he had nothing to do with it. So it's only the bad decisions that he's responsible for. The good decisions at the top he's not responsible for. Is that what you're saying, Simon?
But I can't see any good... Right. But I'm not aware of any good decisions. But my point is there's no humility. You don't admit when you get something wrong. All you do is you deflect and start talking about things that are good.
But Simon, this is where a lot of people might have been with you up until that point. But obviously the government made a decision to put £700 million into the programme from Oxford University and give them the facilities to try and get this vaccine underway. Now, they needn't have done that. That was a government decision. Whether Boris Johnson took that decision himself or not, I have absolutely no idea. But if you say the buck stops with him for all the bad things, surely you have to admit the buck stops with him for the good things too. I think that's what Andrea was saying.
Yeah, but the way he carries on about it is as if he's the one that's been out there and done all the jabbing. All he did was make a decision. Now, all right, let's let him have that then, okay? But the thing is, again, to highlight my point is, he'll go on and on and on about vaccines, and the answer to everything is vaccines.
All right.
But,
well,
we are taking us over now.
Simon, have you had your vaccines, by the way? Have you had your vaccinations?
Of course I have.
Oh. Who have you got to thank for that?
Who have I got to thank for that? The lady that created the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Which was funded by the UK government, who's, as you call it, Tories.
Okay, and paid for by me.
Yeah, but and paid for, but Andrew's right, by every British taxpayer, and they're being supplied at cost to the government and to the rest of the world, unlike any other of the vaccines. That was a decision that Boris Johnson presumably did make to make sure that there was no profiteering over this.
Okay, and what did he say? We was something along the lines of we did it because we're greedy and selfish, or something along those lines. Well, that's nothing to be proud of.
Well, we will consider your bid for a panel place next week on Cross Questions, Simon. I think out of all the cross questions that we've done, that's the longest a caller has ever spoken. But thank you very much indeed for that. It's high time we went to the news headlines at 8:34 with Dominic Ellis.
Fully vaccinated travellers from the EU and the US won't have to quarantine when arriving in England, Scotland and Wales from an amber list country from Monday. People will still be required to complete pre-departure screening and a PCR test on or before day 2 after they've landed. The Welsh Government says it regrets the change but will align with the UK Government's decision because of the open border with England. A dedication ceremony has been held for a new police memorial in Staffordshire. It commemorates all personnel who've lost their lives since the formation of modern policing in 1749. And Team GB have now won 60 medals in Tokyo after another successful day. 3 more were won today in swimming, rowing and dressage. And the weather. Rain across Scotland will ease tonight, but expect more heavy showers across central UK. Southern areas will be breezy and mostly dry. A low of 11 degrees.
LBC
On our panel today, Andrea Jenkyns, Conservative MP for Morley and Outwood, Amelia Womack, Deputy Leader of the Green Party, John O'Connell, Chief Executive of the Taxpayers Alliance, and Maurice Mcleod, Chief Executive of Race on the Agenda, and he's also a councillor for the Labour Party. We're going to go to Naples in Italy. Oh, how I wish we could all go to Naples in Italy now, with Chris. Hello, Chris.
Hello, good evening. I'm actually still one of Andrea's constituents. I'm a Wakefield, I'm an Outwood boy. Yes, I'm from Outwood.
She's smiling.
I've got a two-part question. There have been two major infrastructure announcements in Britain, from what I can gather this week. RIS2 and HS2. RIS2 is Britain's biggest ever road building programme, which is, to put it into context with HS2, it's twice the cost and about 10 times the environmental impact of HS2. That's been green-lighted this week, and I think most people would never have heard of it, and certainly have not heard a squeak out of the Green Party about this. So I'm just wondering, from the Green Party, what is their... well, I can guess what their opinion would be, but on the HS2 side, there's been another decision on that, which is relevant as well. The eastern leg, the section from Birmingham to to Leeds and Yorkshire, has been put on hold, unfortunately. But HS2, of course, is a national infrastructure project. I'd actually like to put to the Green Party about HS2, which seem to be relentlessly against, unfortunately. I must say, you seem to make a bit of a fool of yourself over this, but we've not heard anything about the road building programme. But the last few years have been HS2.
We don't put questions to just one panellist. They go to all of our panellists, Chris.
All right, okay. Well, sorry. Well, the thing that HS2 I would think have not been mentioned is domestic air travel, which I think is a really relevant thing in as we've seen massive floods in Italy this week. We need to cut greenhouse gas emissions. That's absolutely crucial. There's a climate emergency. Britain now has the biggest domestic air route in Europe, London to Edinburgh and Glasgow, 170 flights a day. That equates to 30,000 passengers or 60 trains. That's completely beyond the railway's capability. We need HS2 to run that.
We've got your point. John O'Connell, I must admit I haven't heard of this roads announcement. I don't know if you have, but on HS2, is this a giant waste of money?
I hadn't heard about the roads announcement too, but that's my oversight rather than Chris's. HS2 is a waste of money. It was originally slated to cost just over 30 billion. At present, official estimates are 106 billion. It doesn't do anything to address regional inequalities in terms of infrastructure. You know, a much better idea would have been to have a rail linking Liverpool to, over to Hull and maybe up to Newcastle. So there's plenty of other ways to improve the infrastructure of the country without a train line up to Birmingham and then beyond for £106 billion. So, yeah.
And do you think the pandemic has actually undermined any business case that there even was, given that we're all used to having video conferencing now and using Zoom and Teams and all the rest of it? Surely that means that fewer people will want to travel that route.
Possibly, yeah. And, it was a flimsy business case to start with. The original business case assumed an average passenger income of £70,000 a year. So it's pretty much a rich man's train paid for by ordinary taxpayers.
Or women's.
Indeed so. Listen, and as you say, a much cheaper alternative would be to kit out the entire rolling stock in the UK with Wi-Fi. Let everybody work on the train and it would improve productivity and save a shed load of money.
I think you can get Wi-Fi on most mainline trains now, can't you? Maybe not some commuter trains.
Maybe not particularly stable or useful Wi-Fi.
Well, that's very true. Maurice Mcleod, what's your view?
HS2 and all of these developments, it's difficult, isn't it? Because they were planned in the past. They feel out of date already. Even the idea that we're going to invest loads and loads of money so that people can get to London a little bit quicker just seems like such a throwback of an idea when I'm talking to you, look into a little screen now, and that's how we've all been running our lives for the last sort of 18 months. So I think the government has a a habit, I'd say, of doing or having these real big sort of almost vanity projects. And I'm not sure if HS2's one of those, but it feels like we need to be looking completely again at our planning, how are we developing our infrastructure, and how are we developing an infrastructure that actually fits the new world that we kind of want to live in, because I feel like things have changed in the last couple of years even.
One man's vanity project is another man's visionary project, I suppose. And when you look at the fact that Germany, France, they've got high-speed trains, we haven't, surely that at least is an argument for high-speed rail.
Is that back to me?
Yeah.
It's not. That sounds really. Sadly, that sounds like what I fear it is. That sounds like, they've got one, so we should have one. We should be doing what works for our country. We should, as was just said, we should be linking parts of the north with other parts in the north, not finding a way to get down to London more quickly. It's a very London-centric, and I'm saying this from a South London flat. This is a very London-centric way of thinking of the country, and yeah, why not take a step back and go, okay?
No, I get that, but London is the economic powerhouse of the country. If you look at GDP and the percentage of GDP that London provides, then it's not surprising that all roads and railway lines lead to London, is it?
But that ends up being yes, it's the capital. It's called the capital for a reason. But ends up being a self-fulfilling thing. If you go, all the money goes to London, therefore we need to make sure all the infrastructure goes to London, therefore more money goes to London, therefore you make that as an excuse to put more infrastructure spending into London. It's no wonder other parts of the country are getting annoyed and want to go their own way. I don't really blame them.
Andrea, what's your reaction to this leg of HS2 to Wakefield and Leeds being paused? Because that presumably will affect your constituency rather badly.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, first of all, if I can just put my views on HS2, etc. I mean, I'm very pro any investment in the north and in infrastructure in the whole country. I mean, as Chris will know, we need to also get the basic rights right. I mean, our bus routes are not great, especially if you live in one of the little villages. I mean, in London, as an MP who travels to London, I can see such a massive difference in the infrastructure in London compared to what we have up north, and it just doesn't seem right. So I'm pleased for any investment in infrastructure, be it trains, our roads, and let's face it, I know we've got this whole green agenda, but if we don't get better infrastructure with our trains, even our local stations, back to the disabled access we mentioned earlier, better bus routes that go out into the rural areas, then we're not going to reduce the amount of cars out there. So I'm incredibly disappointed, Chris, that this leg has been cancelled. I can understand the reasons why economically, because of the pandemic. I think the whole project has been overspent, and is, as we heard earlier from the Taxpayers Alliance, it's not necessary. Every pound spent is not being spent necessarily in the best way. All these projects always end up going over budget, which, as a Conservative, I hate to see personally. But I would like to see also an east to west rail in the north, and I want to see our roads improved as well.
You see, I can imagine, Andrea, that if this wasn't affecting your constituency, you might be rather against HS2 full stop.
No, actually, no. I'm all for investment. I mean, I remember doing a speech at a Conservative event in the north, and I got boos in the audience for supporting HS2 because to me it's about investment of the north. Consecutive governments have neglected the north, and any investment which is going to strengthen our economy and infrastructure, that should be a good thing. It's been forgotten about for too long, so I'm very pro it, actually.
Amelia, why do the Green Party oppose HS2? I'd have thought this was something that you might have thought was sort of railways good, airplanes bad.
So we're not against high-speed rail as a concept. We think that we do need high-speed rail, but HS2 simply goes through a route of pristine ecology and ancient woodlands. And effectively, once with our ecological systems, once they're gone, they're gone.
But that's going to be the case with any new rail line or any new road or any new development, isn't it?
But if you look at HS2, if it didn't, what's been prioritised is speed. That's been the most important thing.
Well, the clue's in the title.
So to get to be as fast as possible, it has to be straight, which means that instead of weaving around ancient woodlands and sites of special scientific interest and places that we do need to be conserving that ecology, it is cutting straight through it.
You're right, but hasn't the government at least ameliorated this to some extent by building many more tunnels? Now, I mean, I don't know whether you think tunnels sort of a bad thing environmentally, but a lot of the route, particularly through the Chilterns, Conservative constituencies, obviously, are now going to be predominantly tunnelled.
So it's about, our ecology is big and complex, and we see ecosystems that we simply don't begin to understand. And I think there are basic scientific principles that we need to be putting in place when we address these problems. I mean, it's not just about the tunnels. I've heard members of the government talk about tree planting programmes that will replace ancient woodlands, and that is simply not how it works. And I mean, you cited France and Germany as areas that have high-speed rail, but actually I understand that they're reducing their investments into that area because it's become too expensive and it's not what people need. When I talk to people, I know that what people want is simply that the greenest option is the cheapest and the easiest option. And when I look at that line, it's not going to make the greenest option the cheapest and easiest option. It's only going to be available to those with the highest incomes. But also that line is an interesting line. I travel by train so much. It's the only one that has real competition with different speeds and different prices. And again, that going back to a vanity project, is that the area where we need that infrastructure? And being from Wales, it really doesn't benefit anybody in Wales.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. Chris, I think we got your views from your initial question, and we're running very, very late. So thank you very much indeed for that. More in a moment. It's 10 to 9.
This is LBC.
We've come 8:53 on LBC. Lots of you texting and tweeting in saying, will Sean from Concept be on your panel next week? All I can say is that my people are talking to his people. Well, they're talking to him, actually. So we're trying to work that one out. Now, James is in Watford and has a question for our panel. Hello, James.
Good evening. A recent report has put the cost of the government's pandemic measures at £372 billion. But does the panel regard this as a COVID cost or a lockdown cost?
What's the difference?
Is it something that you regard that this has happened because of you've made a decision to do the lockdown and that's why it's cost all this money, or was it an inevitable cost as part of the pandemic? So was it about choice or was it an inevitable thing?
Maurice?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Are you saying that you look
really grateful that I've come to you first.
Really I'm like, please don't. But anyway, no, 372 billion quid has been spent on. I missed the report. What? I'm not. So what?
I think that it was calculated that that's the cost of the pandemic to the taxpayers so far. Whether it's through extra money for the NHS, whether it's through furlough, whether it's through other schemes that the government have brought in, the extra PPE, everything together cost 372 billion. Now, I've got no idea what proportion of that was furlough, but James is, I think, positing that, was that the cost of COVID or is it the cost of lockdown restrictions?
Well, but the lockdown restrictions, and I'm no fan of the government, but the lockdown restrictions were there so that we didn't have ridiculously high death rates from COVID. 150,000 people died. If we hadn't locked down at all and we hadn't brought in some sort of, I might have spent the money slightly differently, sure. And certainly as we were talking earlier about the contracts, I would absolutely have spent that differently. But, I think it's unfair to sort of say, did you need to spend that money because that's not the cost of COVID. COVID costs life rather than money. And so the government is responsible for protecting us and making sure that we don't lose our lives. So I think some of that spending is there is no cost on my mum's life, for instance.
Just because we're running out of time a little bit, just if everyone else can keep their comments reasonably concise, that would be appreciated. Andrea Jenkyns.
Thank you, Ian. Well, it comes down to really with the public purse, whichever side of the economic argument you stand on, whether it's the socialist or the free market conservatives, etc. A government's got to make difficult decisions. And I think, in answer to your question, it's probably both. We've locked down the economy. It's during lockdown, it's clearly going to have a knock-on effect and cost billions of pounds. But at the same time, the cost of actually not only servicing people and paying for them to be locked down through furlough, etc., to help them through the difficult times, that's cost money. Plus, at the same time, the cost of saving people's lives and finding the vaccine. So I think, as in any government around the world at the moment, some difficult decisions has had to be made, and 372 billion is a lot of taxpayers' money. And the next thing is going to be, how do we pay this back? Because we don't want to be saddling, I've got a 4-year-old, we don't want to be saddling him and his children with debt. So how are we going to pay this back in a responsible way?
John?
Agree with Andrew's last comments. Of course, the next conversation is about how we pay for it. And to answer an earlier point, the cost of furlough so far is 64 billion of that 372. So the figures are astronomical. But of course, the early action was necessary. I think, even the Taxpayers Alliance, even the hard-nosed Taxpayers Alliance were open to the idea that we needed to act quickly and spend money, because this is what governments are there for, to look after the country in times of emergency. But Andrew's absolutely right. Now that the money has been spent, we now need to talk about how we're going to pay for it into the future. The constant ideas for increasing taxes when we've already got a 70-year high tax burden, I'm afraid, ordinary households just won't be able to, afford it. And so we need to go for growth. We need to make sure that the economy is growing. And so far, so good. And I know the IMF has predicted that the UK will grow at 7% over the next year. So hopefully that does repair some of the damage for us.
Maurice, you were disagreeing with that?
Yeah, I mean, only slightly. I mean, I think we need to be honest. Absolutely, a lot of the country's gone through an economic hit. Our billionaires have done pretty well. Their wealth's gone up by 20% during the pandemic when we've all been struggling. So, and I know you'll talk about them being wealth creators and all this sort of thing, but it's worth remembering not everyone's struggling. So if we're looking for, I don't know, a magic money tree, that's where I'd be looking first, I must admit.
Amelia?
Amazon have made their money as a result of the roads that we built on public funds and as a result of the hospitals keeping people alive. And I do feel like a windfall tax is something that should be talked about to ensure that we are taxing appropriately those companies that have taken advantage of the pandemic for their to make money. And I think there are ways that we need to be thinking about that.
There you go, John. Windfall tax on Amazon. That would be a vote winner for anybody that proposed that, wouldn't it?
A vote winner, but they'll just pass the cost on to consumers. So it'll be ordinary
households. Just like Google are with this digital service.
It's ordinary households that always pick up the tab.
Sorry, Amelia, I interrupted you.
In terms of the choice versus inevitability, I really feel that this was inevitable as a result of bad risk management. If you look at the government's own risk register, a global pandemic was as likely as heavy snow that disrupted the country. And I feel that there was a lot of work that could have been put in place by ensuring that we had a well-funded NHS, by ensuring that that PPE was in stock, by even changing our risk register when we knew that SARS was an issue and not just expecting a flu pandemic. So I think that this is really bad risk management that has cost the country, and it was inevitable and as a result of that poor management.
Final text question from Jenny in Uxbridge. According to Cambridge University, the Northern accent could die in the next 45 years. Which accent would you save from extinction? I'm going to add a little rider onto that. Which accent would you like to consign to the history books? Amelia?
Oh, I was going to say the Welsh accent because I'm from South Wales.
You
but
don't sound very Welsh.
I know. I'm from Newport, but that's what everyone says. I feel very sad that
my former PA was from Newport, and he sounded as if he was from Newport. Are you from one of the posh bits?
Is it especially posh bits?
I don't know. I've never been there.
I think, but equally, I might. Like a love-hate relationship, maybe with my own local accent, but I don't think I could consign an accent because it's just
you don't want to offend
beautiful
anyone. In case you
of our
become
country.
Next leader of the Green Party, are you standing? Give us an exclusive.
I don't have any announcements at the moment, but it's just been such a privilege to work with Sian and Jonathan, and we've got over 450 councillors now, and just going from strength to strength, moving into the third largest party.
Sian is on Cross Question next week, by the way. Sian Berry.
Yes.
John O'Connell, accents.
I'm from North London originally, and I've just moved to Norfolk, so I'd preserve the Norfolk accent because I'm new to the area, so why not?
You're absolutely right to do that. Seeing as that's where I sort of live as well. Where have you moved to in Norfolk?
Where? Yeah. A village called Pulham Market.
I know it well. And any accent that you particularly would like to consign to the history books?
I love almost all of the accents.
Oh, come on.
But I will. I'll get off the fence. I will get off the fence. My least favourite, not necessarily meaning it's bad, but my least favourite is probably the West Midlands. Yeah, sorry about that.
Me too. Andrea Jenkyns.
I was going to say that, the Brummie accent, I'm afraid. I'll always give an honest answer. It's not my favourite, not that I'm saying there's anything wrong with it, but if we had to choose.
But you're a northerner. Do you worry about your accent could be dead by the time you are?
I don't, particularly... let's look at the northern accent. It's so varied. If you look at, Jacob, my friend and colleague at Redcar, through to even, I'm an East Yorkshire girl, is very different to West Yorkshire and South and North Yorkshire. So it's so varied anyway, the northern accent. And I think that's what makes our country great. We are a real mixing pot of different accents. And I particularly love the Irish accent as well. So that's one I'd say.
Well, let's go to our South London lad.
It sounds so boring, but I love accents. I think they're the meat of our souls, aren't they? They tell you a bit about where someone comes from, and you can pick bits about, their history up from how they sound. I was going to say the Brummie accent as well. My best friend is from Birmingham, and
Can I just make clear that LBC cherishes all of its listeners from Birmingham and the West Midlands? All right. Thank you all very much indeed for joining us tonight. Andrea Jenkyns, Maurice Mcleod, Amelia Womack and John O'Connell. We will be back with Cross Question next Monday. I could tell you who the panel will be, but I'm not going to. It's 9:03 on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, quarantine requirements are being scrapped for fully vaccinated travellers from the EU and US arriving in England, Scotland and Wales from amber list countries. They'll still be required to complete pre-departure screening and a PCR test on or before day 2 after they've landed. The change will come into force at 4 o'clock on Monday morning. The Chief Executive at Heathrow Airport, John Holland-Kay, says it's a step in the right direction.
And also for people who just want to go on holiday with some certainty, this is fantastic news. And this covers about 2/3 of